Hey, this is a video to help you understand circle geometry. I'm going to start with this prop, a simple can of Friskies cat food. As you'll notice, it is a circle. It's circular. It's actually a cylinder, but let's not worry about that right now. If I were to measure the distance all the way around it, I would get something called the circumference. So I'm going to peel off this label, and this label will show us the circumference. I will try to peel off the label. There we go. I've already written on here that this is the circumference. So here we go. That is actually the distance around the can, or the distance around the circle. So the distance around the circle is known as the circumference, as you should know, and the distance across a circle is known as the diameter. And so this piece of paper then is an example of the diameter, and you can see that the diameter compared to the circumference is much smaller. Sometime back in ancient Greece, somebody figured out that if you take the diameter and compare it to the circumference, there are 1, 2, 3, and a little bit more diameters in the circumference. Maybe I can color these in to make them look a little bit more obvious here. I'll color the points in so that you can see them on the screen. So if we go point to point there with this diameter, and point to point with this one, you can see that 3 diameters is a little bit less than the circumference. As a matter of fact, the ratio between the diameter and the circumference is exactly 3.14159 yada yada yada, known as pi to 1. In other words, the circumference is 3.14159 times the distance of the diameter, and it's true for every single circle. The distance across the diameter times times pi, we call this pi, equals the circumference. So the only thing you need to know with all these complicated formulas then is that pi times d, or pi times the diameter, equals the circumference. And the other thing you need to know is that the diameter, the distance all the way across the circle, is one measure we know of on a circle. The other is called the radius, which is the distance from the center to the outside of the circle. So the distance from the center to the outside is called the radius, and there are 2 radiuses in one diameter. The radius times 2 equals the diameter. So that means that 2 radiuses is 1 diameter. That means that pi times 2 times the radius will also equal the circumference. These two things are the same. The diameter is 2 radiuses. It's the same thing. So if you're given the radius or you're given the diameter, you can calculate the circumference. Now that's one element of circle geometry you need to know. You need to know these 2 formulas. The next thing you need to know is if you have a circle and you want to know the area of the circle, it's difficult to calculate. And here I've done it on graph paper, and you can see all these little squares. And if you're really clever, you could say, "Oh, I can calculate the area of this. I'll just count all these squares: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10." And you go around and around and around, and count them all up until you get to these partial squares here, and that's a general pain. You can't figure out how much of a square this is here. It's round. It's impossible. So somebody back in ancient Greece figured, okay, well let's measure this radius here. And the radius, that's a radius there. That's one radius, and the radius is the same regardless of where you measure it. From the center to the outside of the circle is a radius. And if you square that radius, so you take 1 squared radius, or r squared, you get something that looks like this. And somebody back in ancient Greece or Egypt or wherever looked at that and said, I wonder how this square here, this squared radius, compares to the area of the circle from which it comes. You see there's a little bit on the outside here, most of it's on the inside. What's the ratio between the squared radius and the circle? Well, the answer is the ratio is pi. In other words, pi times the radius squared will equal the area of a circle. So that's another one to remember then, that pi r squared, or pi times this radius squared, will equal the area of the circle from which it comes. Pi r squared is the radius.